Let's wait a few minutes for Lucia to join us.
So I can start, Nadine. Is everything ready?
Yes, please, Lucia. Thank you very much.
Okay. So good morning, everyone. So I'm Lucia Skumbi. I'm a senior customer consultant for research intelligence for Elsevier. I've been working for Elsevier now 6 years, and I'm based in Cape Town. And very happy to do this presentation for you today on how to select a journal in which to publish. So the context for this presentation is basically looking at the work life of researchers, which has become very complex and very challenging in terms of the many dimensions to it. So increasingly researchers have to work on finding grants, on finding collaborators, promoting their work, ensuring their own visibility as researchers. And this really often leads to researchers being overwhelmed and becoming distracted actually from publishing, when in reality publications are actually critical for the career progression of academics and of researchers. So if you look at to have a publication strategy so that you don't get that kind of distraction, and it is usually, it's important to how to identify a journal strategy that you really need to ensure that you keep the consistency in making sure that you publish very consistently, and I will share with you some of the strategies in terms of making sure to do how to do that. So if you look at the publication strategy, just to give the broader context of that, there are 5 components that are really very important that you need to keep in mind. And the first of that is really what to publish. So when we think about what to publish, it's about being at the forefront, understanding what the hot topics are in your field, what are the growing fields within the subdiscipline, about linking your publications to phenomena that are at play at the moment, like COVID-19, the pandemic situation, also thinking about, strategies, linking your research to the Sustainable Development Goals. So what to publish, being at the forefront, understanding the trends, understanding the hot topics is really important. Then it's also important to think about, when to publish, because it is knowing when your research is ready for publication is not always that evident. So you really need to know that you have original results, and then you have to set targets for yourself, set targets for how many publications do you want to publish in a year or over a course of time, and schedule them, because that makes it a lot more targeted and easier to achieve your goals if you have targets. And then importantly, and we'll touch on this again, is to think about the duration of the publication process. So from submitting your manuscript to a journal until you get a response from the journal, and after the peer review, that can be a considerable length of time, and you really need to take that into consideration as well. We also think about how to publish, because there are many different ways that you can publish now. You can also publish into a repository, you can publish open access, you can decide to only publish your method or only publish your data. And then thinking about co-authoring and the impact of co-authoring that can really increase the visibility of your research a lot. Thinking about publishing or making available, sharing your data along with your publications, that can also increase and enhance your publications. And then another part of the strategy would be to optimize your researcher profile. So importantly, to make sure that you register for a unique author ID, ORCID, to make sure that you are aware of and that you take ownership of your researcher profiles, like your Scopus profile, your Mendeley profile, even ResearchGate, academia.edu, Google Scholar. All of these profiles can really help you to network and to make sure that your research is really visible and that you optimize the work that you've done. But the focus today is, of course, on where to publish. And I've divided the way to publish into 4 specific areas. So firstly, to think about what are the things that I need to be aware of when I want to publish? And then what are the resources that are available that can help me? Thirdly, things that I really need to analyze to be able to understand where, which are the most relevant journals, and then things to assess very carefully or critically even. So those 4 broad categories I will go through from the next. So looking first at things to be aware of. So keeping in the back of your mind, there usually are funder requirements when you publish. So if you've been funded by a specific organization, funding organization, or by your institution, or by the government, there usually is a requirement of some or other sort. It may be that it requires that the journal must be peer reviewed, or a specific type of peer review. It could be that it needs to be an open access journal. It needs to, it might be that you need to archive it in a specific repository. It could be that it must be published in a journal that is part of an accredited list. So funder requirements are important. There could also be national or institutional requirements. So often institutions have a list of approved journals, so make sure you know about those. It could be accredited journals there. It could be a list of journals. So often universities also want their researchers to publish in those journals that are counted by the ranking organization. So Scopus provides data to important rankings like Times Higher Education, World University Rankings, QS, World University Rankings. So in order for the university also to build a profile and to build the visibility, they recommend that researchers select journals that are also counted by the ranking organizations. Then you might have co-author or supervisor requirements as well. So talking with your co-authors, talking with your supervisors is absolutely critical. You can share in their knowledge, in their experience. So this is also important to take into consideration. And then predatory publishing. I think most of you are aware that it is an increasing phenomena, that and that there are other deviant forms of publishers now. So you need to watch out that you don't accidentally select a journal that is considered as a predatory journal. So I'm not going to go into detail, because in the next session, we're going to talk in more detail about exactly what predatory publishing is and how you can avoid them. So looking at knowing your resources. So you need to be able to identify journals. You need to be aware of journal lists. And I'll show you some examples of journal lists. Because in these lists, you will be able to usually search by subject area, or you can even do a title search in them, you know, recognize the titles. They usually give an indication of what subject area they are linked to. There are also publisher tools. So most of the big publishers have tools that help you to select which journal is the most relevant for your specific research. And I'm going to show you one of the tools that is, or the tool that is used by Elsevier. And then also it's important to know what are the sources where I can get information about the reputation of journals. So journal metrics, the impact factor, the site score. What are those, in what sources do I need to look to be able to find information about journal reputation? So firstly, I mentioned the journal lists, a curated list, which means that it has gone through a selection process. All the journals, Scopus contains 24,000 journals, and this journal list is available free of charge at scopus.com. And all of the journals in that list have gone through a selection process, and you can search the list by publisher, by title, by subject area, for example. There's also the Web of Science master journal list. You get, there's a list of only open access journals, the directory of open access journals, and numerous others. I'm not going to go through all of them. We will share the slides afterwards, but it is, the point I want to make here is to be aware of these lists because they can really help you to identify journals that you might not be aware of. Then the publisher tools, we have, within Elsevier, we have a publisher tool called Journal Finder, which allows you to copy and paste your abstract into a search box and build and also add some of the other elements of your like keywords, the title of your manuscript, more or less, you know, what impact are you looking for your journal. These are not mandatory fields, but it goes through the Elsevier fingerprint engine there, where it matches the phrases within your abstract to the journals that are available. So within Elsevier, more than 2,000 journals available, and it helps you to narrow down to a number of journals that will be relevant for your specific subject area. And there are other publishers that have very similar tools as well. There's a Springer Journal Suggestion, there's the Publish and Flourish Open Access tool as well. So these tools are very valuable and it's really beneficial. It saves a lot of time using these tools. And then to find information about journal metrics. So journal metrics are published predominantly by three key sources. And the one is Scopus and Web of Science, which are multidisciplinary international citation databases. Scopus contains 24,000 journals, and Web of Science contains in its core collection, it's around 13,000 journals. And they use the document counts and the citation counts to create journal metrics, which then give you an indication of what is the reputation of the journal. And I'll show you what those metrics look like. There's also Google Scholar, which is not a citation index. Google Scholar is actually it's a search engine for academic literature, but they've also created a journal metrics or a journal metric, or they've taken over the H index and the H5 index as a proxy for the reputation of a journal. so if I can just quickly, if you're not familiar with the H index, and I would recommend using the H5 index if you want to use one of them, is that it gives you the number of, it's an indication of the number of documents that have been published in their journals, and with the equal number of citations. And that is then over a 5-year period. So the H5, the 5, signifies a 5-year period in which the number of documents and the number of citations have been counted, right? So the more familiar journal metrics are site score and the impact factor. So just showing you, this is within the site score, you will find within Scopus. And Scopus then provides you, if you go to Scopus, there's an option to search for journals by the title or by the subject area. And then it gives you information about the site score as well. So the site score of the journal is if you take the number of citations that were received over a 4-year period and you divide it by the number of documents that were published by that journal over the same time, that gives you the site score. So this is it's basically an average, and that average, say, in the example I'm showing on the screen, this is the journal is Water Science. It's part of the agronomy journals, for example. So the 14.5 means that over a 4-year period, articles in this journal are cited 14.5 times. And this metric then gives you a way of comparing it with other journals so that you can see what is the standing, the reputation, the prestige of the journal. To find the impact factor, the primary source for the impact factor is the journal citation reports, but usually the impact factor is also published on the journal website. So in the example also that I'm showing you, you can see that for Water Science, the site score is 14.5 and the impact factor is 9.13. The reason why they are different is because they use slightly different methodologies. So the impact factor uses a 2-year citation window, for example, and it doesn't count exactly the same types of publications, right? So that is why there's a difference between the site score and the impact factor. But both of them are indications of the number of times that articles are cited, which then gives you a way to compare. Important, I'm not going to go into a lot of depth into the journal metrics today, but it is important to keep in mind that both the site score and the impact factor should only be used to compare journals within the same subject field. In Scopus, we have additional metrics that are normalized. There's the source normalized impact per paper, which is called SNP, and there's Schimako journal rank. Those two metrics are normalized, so you can use them to compare journals across different subject areas. But because site score and impact factor are not normalized, you only use them within your specific subject area. And this is just only because the different subject areas have different citation cultures. So overall, for instance, in biomedical sciences, articles are cited a lot more. There's also more publication. If you compare that to social sciences and arts and humanities, there's slower publication and slower citation. So you have a much smaller numbers. So importantly, to keep in mind, compare within your subject area, right? So just to go back, this is where you find journal metrics. You can use Scopus, you can use Web of Science, and you can use Google Scholar, which will provide you information about journal, or which provides journal metrics. Right, so next what is important is also there are things that you can analyze, to also narrow down. There are more than 100,000 academic journals in the world today. So this is really a challenge for researchers to really know, to narrow down. Even if you find a list of journals, you still need to narrow down to a realistic number of journals that you can select between. And the way to do that is to do your subject searches. So the way that when you search for literature, is to also take note of which are the top journals that are coming up in your retrieved literature. So if you do a search on, say, COVID-19, in Scopus, for example, there is an option to analyze your search results, and it gives you a list of the top journals within that field. If you do a topic search or a subdiscipline search, also take note of those journals that come up in the most of your search results, right? So looking at the literature, also take note of the top journals that are relevant and that come up within the results. However, it is the first rule is basically to also analyze your own references. So when you've written your manuscript and you look at what references have you used, this is usually a very good sign for you that these are probably the most relevant journals for me to select in terms of when I want to publish as well. So I want to show you an example on this slide here, which is a researcher which analyzed her own references. So you can create a table for yourself. So you can see, okay, there were 3 top journals that came up the most number of times. And then you list those journals by their titles, and you find their journal metrics. So looking at the site score or the JIF, and you note that down as well, because that gives you an indication of the prestige of the journal. So here we can see journal with a site score of 2.8, which means that on average, articles in this journal over a 4-year period get cited 2.8 times. The next journal, Journal of Occupational Health Psychology, gets 11.1 citations per article. And then the next one, Gender in Management, 2.5, right? So clearly you can see amongst these 3 that the journal with the highest reputation, if you want to call it that, is the Journal of Occupational Health Psychology. So next you would also say, then you look at your own nationality, for example. So in this case, we were looking at a researcher who's based in South Africa. So she wanted to know, does this journal has this journal in the past published South African authors? So that's another, thing to look at, because it's not that you will not be, it's not that it's restricted for you if the journal has not previously published in South Africa, but that gives you a general idea of the audience of this journal. Then you look at what are the author country affiliations generally. So you can see this is mainly US based, Australia, Belgium, Canada. What is good about this is it gives you an idea that this is various different nationalities are publishing in this in these journals. So that also gives you an idea of what is the readership of the journal. You can take note of the publisher as well, and then take specific note, because you can often it's found that the subject area or the topic that you are working on can fall into different subject areas. So take note specifically of the subdiscipline in which the journal is working. And then most importantly is to look at the aims and scope of the journal. So you've narrowed down to 3 journals here that are in your reference list. These are the top journals. You've analyzed them to see, do they usually publish journals from whatever country I'm from? Is it matching the subject area? And then you go deep into the aims and the scope. And here it's very important to look at the specific narrative of what is it that this journal is trying to achieve and what type of articles are they looking for. So you would find, for instance, in the third example, they aim specifically at practitioners, for example. Or you would see that the journal aims specifically on developing theory. So there's a lot of clues in the narrative of how the aims and scope are described that will give you an indication whether these journals are relevant. Right? So if you're working in a specific topic, obviously you're not going to have to do this every time. If you do this kind of detailed analysis, you get to know your journals very well, and you only have to do this once or twice, and then you have an idea of, right, so I've narrowed down, these are the journals that are most likely to accept my manuscript. This is extremely time saving, because the most rejections come from aims and scope that are not right. So the scope of the manuscript does not fit the journal. So if you can save time here, it is really going to benefit your overall publication strategy. Right. So then you also need to very critically look at, I've already mentioned the aims and scope, but the type of manuscript, right? So there are different, it can be a research article, a review article, it can be a short format. So if you have very exciting results that you want to share very quickly, you can use one of the short formats. So you have to take note on the journal webpage what formats are available and select the right format, or even just take note of what the formats are, because many journals, for example, don't accept short formats, or they don't accept review articles, etc. We've talked about the prestige. So you take note of the site score, the journal impact factor, or any other of the others, usually the H index that is used. Okay. Discoverability should also be considered, and discoverability is how widely read is this is the journal, and is the journal indexed, right? So is it available within international indexes like Scopus, like Web of Science, for example, in the directory of open access journals? Will it be easy for other researchers to get to read my article? Rejection rate should also be taken. This is usually published on the journal website. So usually you would say a journal would have a rejection rate of it's usually quite high. If you're aiming, the higher the site score, the higher the impact factor of the journal, the higher the rejection rate usually is. So just also to prepare yourself and to understand and be realistic about the acceptance of your manuscript. And then the duration, that's very important, because you have to also prepare yourself for what is the time that it takes for you to get feedback from the journal, and that could be considerable. So I'll share with you some of the more general information there. And I've already mentioned also, so you need to consider the intended audience and the geographic reach. So, and this is why in the example, when you analyze your journals, you look at who are the authors, and the Scopus and Web of Science citation indexes also give you information about who cited the journal, the articles within those journals. So you can, from that, you can see what is the geographic reach of that journal. Right, so just looking here at the submission to acceptance duration. So on a very broad average, you will hear within 4 months in terms of to get feedback from the peer review. Whether it has been immediately rejection is usually within 4 to 6 weeks after submission. And the publication schedule is important. So you need to also, if this information is not provided upfront by the journal, you can look in the journal to look at how many issues do they publish? Do they publish continuously? Or do they have specific number of issues per year? So the peer review process is unfortunately a long process. So you can imagine from the editor making the first decision, then finding the right reviewers, and then getting feedback from the reviewers. That obviously takes long. And in some journals it takes longer than others. Some journals do offer fast track options, but those would be on the short, the brief, and the rapid communications usually. If a journal covers those publication types, that could often be a fast tracking. Otherwise, in the journal, watch out for the received, the accepted, and the published date, because that can also give you an idea of what the duration is that you should be keeping in mind. Right. So also how to publish. These days, you can make a decision, do you want to, or often there's a funder requirement, open access, for example, preprint service are available. Preprint service do not go through peer review. There are different types of them, but that is an option. You can also, as I mentioned, only publish your data, your methods, or your software. So open access, how that works is then there's a fee that is payable by the author or the institution or the funder. So they cover the publication costs. The author has to cover the publication costs upfront. This can range between $150 to more than $6,000. So that really depends on what is the quality of the journal. But this is one of the decisions to make also in terms of how to publish. So you can publish in a subscription journal where the cost of the journal is basically covered by the university or the university library that is subscribing to the journal. Open access, the author or the institution or the funder is responsible for that cost upfront. These are some of the examples of other types where you publish your methods, your data, or only your software. So these are examples within the suite of Elsevier journals that you can look out for. So coming to the end of my presentation, I just want to recap on this, on the overall publication strategy. So thinking about what to publish. Oh, I've got my order wrong here. Let me just open all of them. So what to publish here is to thinking about, what is hot topic? What are the growing fields? Being up to date, linking to the phenomena that you see at the moment, like the pandemic, like sustainable development goals, that can really optimize and enhance your publication. Looking at when to publish, really knowing when your research is ready, that you have original results, setting targets, considering the duration of your publication process, very important. How to publish is about looking at the different publication models. Like I just mentioned, open access is available. Other publication formats are also available. Optimizing your profile is about making sure that you have a unique user ID or researcher ID or author ID actually. Making sure you have a unique one. ORCID provides a unique author ID. And then using social media platforms, making sure that you take ownership of your Scopus. Your Scopus profile, make sure that all your documents are linked. When you're applying for a position, applying for a promotion, ranking or rating within national systems, the Scopus profile, the Web of Science profile, the Google Scholar profiles, those are important. So make sure that they are up to date and that they are visible. And then finally, we talked about where to publish. And there we looked at the funder requirements, the type of publishers that we have, the journal metrics, how to use them, how you must analyze your own references that you're using. Look at what is the geographic reach of your journals, and then selecting the right manuscript. So I hope this has been useful. I'm not sure if we are taking questions now, or are we moving into the next presentation, where I'll talk to you a bit more about predatory journals.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lucia, for the first part of your presentation. Very informative and yeah, benefit to address. I submitted the manuscript for consideration since August 1st, and it's still with the editor. How long should we normally allow our manuscript stay with the editor before making inquiry?
It depends a lot on the journal, so you can just check on the journal webpage whether they provide any information about what is the average duration. I think I don't think it is realistic to inquire before 6 weeks. So there are many journals that of course respond before that, but I would say a very broad average would be about 6 weeks, then to start following up and trying to see if you can get a response.
All right. What is continuous publication online?
So journals usually have 2 ways of publication. So they wait until, so if it's a journal that is published, if they are publishing, say, 4 issues per year, and each issue has like 8 articles. So they would wait until they have enough publications to publish an issue. So they would have to wait until they've got 8 publications ready, and then they would publish the issue. But more and more in online publication, articles are published as they are received. So there are no specific number of publications within an issue, and sometimes not even issues at all. So as the manuscripts are received after peer review, after all the processes have been completed, it's made available online.
That's great. So one participant is asking if you can repeat the recap slide.
The recap slide. Sure,
yes,
all of it. Okay.
Just the overview of it.
Sure. Let me go back. Let me go back and find my overview slide right there. Sorry, just give me a minute.
Sure.
Okay. Do you see the slide now?
Yes.
Okay. So the recap was basically to look at the whole, all the components of a publication strategy. So we look at what to publish. And when we think about what to publish, it's about being aware of the hot topics of the growing fields, of being up to date in your field. So setting up alerts, if you're using Scopus, for example, set up alerts so that you are informed about what's new and happening within your field. Also linking to any phenomena that is existing, as for instance, the pandemic, linking your research to sustainable development goals. All of these can be good strategies to enhance your publications. And then thinking about when to publish, it's important to to know when you are ready. So are you sure that there's no duplication? Do you know where there are gaps in the research? Do you have original results? And then about setting targets and scheduling them for your publications. So a number of first author publications, or where you have where you are the co-author, also thinking about conference proceedings, but actually trying to set dates to them. So by the end of the year, I want to have 3 publications, for example, one first author, one as a co-author, and one conference paper. Then looking at how to publish, this is where you consider the types of publication models. It could be publishing with a classic way, which is the subscription-based, or it could be open access if you want your article to be open to anybody, freely available, not only to researchers that have access to subscription journals. You can upfront pay the article fees, or the publication fees. So open access is one of the ways. Also thinking about alternative ways of publishing your research and making it available in repositories. Publishing your data, also thinking about co-authoring. International co-authorship, for example, is a good strategy to enhance the visibility of your research. So how to publish is one of the important components. And then optimizing your profile, making sure that you register for a unique author ID through the ORCID system, so that your research is always so that it's easier for any system to link publications to your profile, and that if your name is very similar to another author, for example, that publications are not accidentally linked to a wrong profile or not linked at all. So that's important. And then using the profiling systems that are available. So the Scopus profile, the Web of Science researcher profile, Mendeley. There's also ResearchGate, academia.com, Google Scholar. All of these offer author profiles. And using social media is very powerful also to promote your work. I didn't mention that previously, but using different social media is also important, because the groups of researchers that use the different platforms are also different. So Facebook are usually older researchers, and then Instagram are younger researchers, and then Twitter is sort of in the middle. So, try to cover the different social media, or what would be the most relevant in terms of your research. And then the whole presentation, the focus then was on where to publish. And we looked at, what you should be aware of, what are some of the requirements, what are the resources that you need to know about, where to find journal metrics, things that you need to analyze, specifically your own references, and then things to assess carefully, like what is the duration, what is the geographic reach of the journal, focusing on the aims and the scope, and the specific narrative that is used to explain what is the audience of this and what is the aim of the journal, right? So I hope that's been a recap for you.
That's very good. Thank you very much, Lucia. So I think next we have a kind of a fun game just to break the ice with the participants and give them a little bit break before our next session. It will take just a few minutes. So Juliet, are you on the call?
Okay, yeah, I'm on the call. So I think we'll take that in about a minute. I'm just wrapping up the game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, please be patient for our next sessions. I know I have received a lot of questions on the publishing models and the APCs, the Gold Open Access, subscription model publishing. So please be patient for the last session on this webinar will be dedicated for the publishing models including subscription model, open access model, and subsidized models. So please be patient for our next sessions as well. Also, we'll be tackling the very interesting topic of how to avoid predatory journals when you decide to publish your research papers. So this is gonna be our next session just after our game break. So please be patient and stay with us. Lucia, a quick question for you while Juliet is preparing the game break. So in order to have a better chance of being published, should the author choose a specialized journal or the multidisciplinary journal?
It would be, that's a difficult one for me to answer if I'm not aware of what the subject, or of the subject is. So I would say probably if you are looking for greater visibility, then the multidisciplinary. But if you're really building an academic, if you're really aspiring to be a professor, it would be important to look at the more subject discipline journals.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much.
Okay.
One question here, how to proceed when my paper had gone under review and we responded to editor and reviewers and made the requested modification after waiting for a month, and we get a response afterwards from the editor saying that the manuscript is rejected because he could not reach the reviewers. So how to proceed after that?
That's very unfortunate. That's very unfortunate. That's something that could be happening because that's more like a technical or a process problem that has occurred. But that then gives you the opportunity to send your manuscript to a different journal. But the really unfortunate thing of the time that was wasted. But there's nothing really that you can do about that. Yeah, you just have to just as quickly as possible submit it to another journal.
Mm-hmm. Can I publish the same work which is already published but repeated over time in order to compare the results of 2 years, for example?
Well, if it's a comparison where the first work is then part of it, yes. I mean, in that process, you also you are going to reference yourself, so you have to also do that. But it sounds like it will be different research, yes. So that would be fine to do that.
For the participants asking for a repeat of some slides, please refer to the webinar recording that will be posted on our channel on YouTube, Elsevier Africa. For the sake of the time, we will proceed to next on the agenda, next sessions on the agenda. So Juliet, are you ready now?
Yeah, so I'm ready now. I hope I can share my slide. Can I share my screen, please?
Yes, you can.
Okay, so I'm sharing my screen right about now. Okay, yeah, so here we go. Share screen. All right, everyone. My name is Juliet. I'm the co-founder of Academic Hive for African Scholars. And I'm sure we have had a wonderful session so far, and the next session is going to be very interesting as well. So this is just a small break for us to just get acquainted with Elsevier and Academic Hive. All right, so here it's an icebreaker called Two Truths and a Lie. So you will see three sets of statements, and two of these statements are truth and one is a lie. So you can use the chat box to tell us, indicate which of these statements is a lie. All right, so here we go. Which is a lie? The Elsevier workshop, Secrets of Getting Published, is organized by A. Elsevier Africa, B. Academic Hive, C. Bootcamp Hive. So let's see you just have about 10 seconds to indicate the wrong answer. Which is the lie? Okay. Yeah, all right. So the lie is C, Bootcamp Hive. There's actually nothing like Bootcamp Hive. The Elsevier workshop, Secrets of Getting Published, is organized by Elsevier Africa and Academic Hive for African scholars. Okay, congrats to all who got it. So which is a lie? Scopus is a product of Elsevier. Elsevier is the owner of Google Scholar. Mendeley is a reference manager app by Elsevier. Which of these is a lie? Which is a lie? Okay. So here is the lie. Elsevier is the owner of Google Scholar. That is a lie. Elsevier do not own Google Scholar. Elsevier actually has wonderful products like Scopus and Mendeley. Here it's another one, which is a lie. Elsevier Africa team covers English, French, and Arab-speaking countries in Africa in terms of workshops and online trainings. All announcements are made through the Elsevier Africa page on Facebook. B. Elsevier Africa cares for the scientific community in Africa and would like to receive feedback through surveys launched after each webinar. And C. Elsevier do not care about Africans, which is a lie. Oh, great. Yeah, congrats to all who said C. C is actually the lie because Elsevier cares about Africans, so C is a lie. So we can actually get information about upcoming workshops on Elsevier through the Elsevier Africa page on Facebook. And the final question, which is a lie? Academic Hive is an online scientific and research community for early career scholars. Academic Hive has presence on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Academic Hive is on, yeah, hello?
Yeah, Juliet, we lost your presentation.
Oh my, okay, here's the last one. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, yeah, so here's the last question. Okay, I'll just read it out, I think, while trying to share my screen, yeah.
Sure.
So, which is a lie? Academic Hive is an online scientific and research community for early career scholars. Academic Hive has presence on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And Academic Hive is on Pinterest. So which is a lie? There are two truths here and one is a lie. So which of these is a lie? Okay, Amin says C. Yeah, so the correct answer, oh yes, the answer is C. The answer is C. Academic Hive is on Pinterest. No, we are not on Pinterest. We are on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram. Yeah, you can find us there, but we're not on Pinterest. So yeah, I think that's basically it. I'll leave the stage now for the next panelists to have the presentation on how to avoid predatory journals.
Thank you very much, Juliet, for this very interesting game that made us take a little bit break and yeah, get us ready for the next session. So, Lucia, are you ready for the next one?
Yes, I'm ready. Screen. Right. Are you? Is my screen right? Can I start?
Yes, right away,
Okay.
please.
Right.
Thank
So
you.
thank you everybody for bearing with me and for allowing me another slot to speak to you about this also very important topic of predatory journals and how to avoid predatory journals. Before we get to avoiding predatory journals, I want to give a very thorough introduction about what are predatory journals. I think for us working in academia, working as researchers or as advanced students, it's really part of scholarship to understand what predatory journals are. So on this slide, what you can see is that the escalation of predatory journals is really tremendous. This is a study that was done in 2015, so it's a little bit old, but it really is a very striking way of showing what the escalation has been of predatory journals. So these researchers found that more than 420,000 articles in predatory journals were published between 2010 and 2015, and that was already an increase of more than 53,000 from 2010, and this is continuing. The most recent count that I've heard is that there are about 34,000 predatory journals out there. I haven't quoted it on the slide because I couldn't find that reference again, but it's stuck in my mind. 34,000 journals, really a huge number of predatory journals. So where does it come from? What is predatory publishing? What is it exactly? The term itself was coined by Jeffrey Beall, a librarian at the University of Colorado in Denver, and it dates back to 2010. And it was in this time that Beall became the unofficial watchdog of predatory publishing. So he started a website or blog in which he listed publishers and journals which he considered that he considered or that he picked up were predatory. And this website was closed down then in 2017. It's not very clear exactly, why it was closed down, but the indication basically was that there was so much pressure from the predatory publishers and threatening to the universities and to him personally that he was basically forced to close down his website. The definition that Jeffrey Beall used at that time was that predatory journals are journals that prey on, and he said, often unsuspecting and often young scholars to submit their manuscripts for the sole purpose of making money from these scholars. So unfortunately, what happened is that predatory publishing started basically the same time that open access started. So they saw this opportunity where they can defraud authors by authors paying an article processing charge to publish their manuscripts open access but they would not provide all the publication functions that really go along with that. So Bill was often, then because it started around the same time, he was often criticized for being opposed to open access. So since 2010, there's a lot of research has gone into, so to determine exactly what was the merit of Beale's criteria that he used, and then also to come up with a more succinct kind of a definition of what exactly are predatory publishers. So one of the definitions was by Johan Maton, 2017. In his publication, he said that he said predatory published journals have the intention to deceive and defraud, and it is very evident that is the sole purpose that they have. Another research group came up with the definitions: journals which accept articles for publication along with authors' fees without performing the promised quality checks for issues such as plagiarism and ethical approval. So the publication functions that are usually go along with publishing are not performed, but they take money from the authors. So you can see in all of these definitions, fraud, money comes into it. So what are the red flags that indicate that a journal is predatory? And it's important to note here that not any of these in its own indicates that it is a predatory journal. So these are just red flags. These are some of the ways that you can recognize them, but in itself, it doesn't mean that the journal is necessarily that it is predatory. So one of the things that is a red flag is false or misleading information. So there's a fake impact factor, incorrect addresses, misrepresentation of the editorial board, false claims of indexing of membership associations. So they would say, for instance, on a website, we belong to COPE, the Committee of Publication Ethics. They would indicate that they do peer review, but at the same time, they would say that they publish very quickly. So everybody who has published knows that the peer review process is very lengthy. It is not possible to publish a under the peer review system if it is promised to be published within a week. So those are some of the red flags. Then others are deviation from best editorial and publication practices. So just unprofessional looking websites, spelling, grammar mistakes, and so on. These are also red flags. Often the predatory publishers are not a first language speaker, so it's often translated or machine translated. And when you recognize something like that, it should be a red flag. There's also lack of transparency, so very little or no information about how editorial decisions are made, what type of fees apply, and how the peer review is organized. You wouldn't see any contact information. Details about the article processing charges would not be, upfront and evident. Information about the editors and the members of the editorial boards would be unverifiable. So it would be just a name, for example. It would be difficult to know who is this person that is on the editorial board. Then aggressive sending of spamming emails. So in itself, this is not a predatory journal, but it is a very strong red flag that it might be predatory. So excessive flattering tone within the email, and then inviting researchers to send their manuscript. Right. So these predatory publishers, they buy data illegally, or they also scrape the internet to find the names of researchers that have published or that have spoken at conferences, or have recently graduated, so they know there's there's a thesis that has been written. So they scrape the internet to get hold of names, and they send out bulk emails asking for your manuscript. Right? So these are not all the red flags, but these are the most common red flags that you should be watching out for. But it is important to distinguish between what is really deceptive, what is predatory, and just what is a poor journal. With other words, like just a sloppy journal, where the journal, for instance, has been set up within an academic department, within a university, and the editorial team they don't have the capacity or the knowledge or the experience, to really run the journal well. That does not mean that it's a predatory journal. That just means that it is not of a high standard. So I want to differentiate, and through this differentiation, try to make it clear what is predatory and what is just a poor journal. So if you're looking at what is the predatory, on the predatory side, which is clearly deceptive and fraudulent, this is non-cumulative. So with other words, any of these attributes that I'm going to mention now, from this you can gather that it is a predatory journal. It's you don't have to see all of this. Even if you see only one of these characteristics, it means that it's a predatory journal, right? So if it provides false information about performing peer review, that's the first one. False information about the editorial board. And then false information about the location of the journal. So this is something that you should always check on a journal's webpage. Where is the journal physically located? And you can even use Google Maps to check the street view, whether there is really, such an address, for example. False information about the journal's impact factor. So very often these predatory journals would just make up a number and publish it to create the illusion that the journal is indexed and that it has an impact factor. Also, when it provides information about indexing services, which is false. So you would see sometimes that it is indexed in Scopus, indexed in Web of Science, but clearly when you go to Scopus or Web of Science, you would not find the journal. Okay. So keep in mind here that that Google Scholar is not an index. Google Scholar is a search engine. So any journal can basically be in Google Scholar. So if it mentions, for example, that the journal is indexed in Google Scholar, that would not be false information because it would probably be there. But if it says it's indexed in Scopus or Web of Science and you check and it's not, then clearly false information is being provided. Right. And then also false information about the costs involved in the publishing. So this is difficult to know. Often the journal would not refer to any cost at all. It would say that it's open access, which per definition means usually that there is a cost unless it is sponsored by an institution. So it would say it's open access, but it would not mention any specific cost until you have submitted your manuscript and then you receive an invoice, right? But this would clearly then be a predatory journal if it provides false information about the cost, right? On the sloppy side of journals, you would get journals where the papers, if you look at the papers, they would just seem of, poor standard. And they would hardly be academic, for instance. So this could just be inexperience or incompetence, but it is not meant to defraud anybody. Then when the scope of the journal is too broad, that's usually, these are academic, we're looking at academic journals. So usually the scope and the subject area would be very clearly defined. If this is not so, if it is accepting almost anything from any researcher. The scope is too broad, and this is not, this is poor editorialship. Unless it says that it's a multidisciplinary journal, of course. Then if it accepts or solicits out of scope of papers, so very similar to the previous point. So there's not there's not clear guidelines and clear indications of or rules in place of what kind of articles, what kind of research is it that we want to publish. That's also, it's not defrauding, it's not deceptive, it's just not good standard. If the website lacks important information like the submission requirements and processes, that's also poor standard, but it's not fake news, it's not defrauding anybody, it's just poor. And if the journal is not indexed, it usually means that most journals want to be indexed in Scopus and in Web of Science because it increases the visibility of that journal, increases the readership. So they would apply for indexing. If the journal is not indexed, it usually means that it's not complying with the standard of the indexing services. Unless, of course, it's a very new journal and it just hasn't been indexed yet. Right. And then if there's no strategy for handling misconduct, so usually a good quality journal would clearly say what they expect of the authors and how they would handle any misconduct. So if there's plagiarism or anything like that, they would indicate how are we going to handle that. If that information is missing, you can think it's a poor journal, but it's not defrauding anybody. It's not deceptive. And then no strategy for digital preservation. This is good practice for a good journal. If there's no strategy for that, it also means that your manuscript can get lost. As technology changes, within a few years, maybe we won't be able to find your manuscript at all or your article at all. So all good journals have a digital preservation strategy in place. If you don't see that on the journal, doesn't mean it's predatory, it just means it's a sloppy journal, right? So using these, this comparison, I hope it makes it clear in terms of what is predatory. Clearly it's deceptive, it provides, there's fake information and it's defrauding authors. Those are the key issues with if you look at a predatory journal. Publication, this is not the same as predatory either, but there are unfortunately deviant forms now because there's so much value is attached to researchers publishing that all different kinds of deviance has popped up, and it's important to be aware of them, but I'm not going to go into a lot of details here. So you get things like a hijacked journal. So this is where a third-party publisher has taken over the website address of a legitimate journal. So say, for instance, Lancet. So they know Lancet is a very well-known journal, so they would use a website address very similar to Lancet, and they would invite researchers to submit their publications there and publish it as if it is by Lancet. So that's a hijacked journal. There's unethical publication, where there's the editorial board are using the journal basically to just publish their own work. So there's excessive publication by the editorial work in their own journal. You get citation manipulation, where the editor would, for instance, say, we'll publish your article, but then you have to cite our journal. So an example of that. You also get paper brokers, third party, it could be a person or it could be a company that acts as a middleman between the author and the journal. So you pay the middleman to get your article published in a journal. So try to absolutely, not do that. Always reach out directly to the journal or directly to the publisher, not through a middleman. This is very unusual, and this is a red flag. If there's a middleman that you pay to get your article published. These days, you also get language plagiarism when an article is published in a local language, for example, say in French, and then it is published again in an international journal in English, but without reference to the original. So this is clear plagiarism then. So just take note, be careful of invitations to publish your manuscript if it's in a local language, to publish it in a international journal that is in English, because that would mean that it's basically being plagiarized. Right. So as I mentioned in the beginning, it's for us as scholars, it's important to also think about why is this happening and what are the driving forces behind it. So the first thing is the publish or perish situation that we have is, for many academics, their career depends really on publishing. So this is one of them. Technology is making it easy because it's easy for a predatory journal to set up a website. Through internet scraping, they can find email addresses so they can spam scholars, and they can also receive electronic payments. So the whole online environment is also conducive for this. The inexperience of researchers now, so especially the past year, I must say, where researchers are working online and they're not directly engaging with librarians, for example, who can help them, who have the expertise to help them distinguish between bogus impact factors and so on. So it really burdens the researcher itself to have to do a lot of investigation and research into journals, which they don't often have time for, and then accidentally send their work off to a predatory journal. Or if you get invited to submit your publication, even better, because then you don't have to do any investigation yourself. And then, probably the main thing behind this, the main driving force, was the unfortunate exploitation of the open access model. So really misusing this pay to publish model. And this is really very unfortunate, because in a conventional journal, the journals generate revenue by selling them to the libraries. In the open access, where the author pays. So this has made people afraid of open access publishers, where in fact there are many strong and very good access journals. And because once you've published in a predatory journal, it's almost impossible to reverse that. So that will always be, it's on your CV. All publications are, open for anybody to see. It's so it will always be to your it will have a negative effect on your reputation when you apply for funding, when you apply for a promotion, or for academic rating, a prize, an award, and so on. Of course, the research time and the research funding has been wasted. And then, just generally, technically speaking, because the predatory journals don't do any archiving, indexing, it really means that your article is just lost. The main effect is basically that it compromises the entire science system. And it was well said by the researchers that I quote you, Erickson and Helgeson, is the phenomenon has the potential to seriously affect the scientific community and also pollute the societal and political landscape, and thus seriously undermining progress and public trust in science. Dubious articles do get cited in the literature. Right. So everything that we believe in science and what we work towards is really undermined by this, because the predatory publishers publish anything and it is not, and it cannot be trusted. I want to show you a few examples of websites where you can see some of the red flags that I've mentioned. So on this page, this is, you know, the typical spamming that you will see. And as I mentioned, you'll see that flattering language there, esteemed researcher, but you've just finished your master's degree, now you're already a esteemed researcher. So using flattering language, and sometimes also threatening language. And then it would be signed something like editor-in-chief, but not a name provided. So that is, be cautious of that. This is an example of a journal's predatory, this is a predatory journal that was identified as a predatory journal. This is what the website looked like. So you can see that clip art was used as the brand images. Normally, a journal would have a well-designed brand. So this is a bit suspect. You would see that some indications that the text was copy-pasted, where you see those little stars or quick question marks, are usually an indication in the text that there was copy and paste used. On this example, you can see this is the contact page, but no names are used. So no personal names are provided, no specific contact information, no physical address. The publisher name is also an acronym. So it's very anonymous, everything of this, anything here. No names provided. Here you can see some sloppy grammar and very vague information. So saying this journal is sponsored by some non-governmental organizations. Usually it would say which non-governmental. So very vague and just sloppy language. Sorry. Here again you have a website of a predatory journal which used a random library photo. So this is just taken in a library. It was taken from the internet and used as the brand image of the journal. It's also using some dubious metrics like ICV, which is associated with Index Copernicus, and I'll come back to that. So impact factor is mentioned here, where if you go and search for this journal, you will see that it is not in the journal citation reports. It's not in Web of Science, so it does not even have any impact factor. So this is fake information provided here. On this page, so there's an ongoing discussion about Index Copernicus. They're often used in by predatory journals. So there's an association made, or a link made between Predatory and Index Copernicus. But as I say, this is an ongoing discussion. It's not clear exactly. They're based in Poland. What we notice from this page taken from Index Copernicus is that these are free stock photos as well that we used used as the contact persons working for Index Copernicus. In this example, you can see what we talked about previously. So the scope of the types of manuscripts that are accepted by this journal ranges from research papers to case studies to comparative studies, but right up to research proposals and synopsis to MTechs, ME, and PhD thesis. So clearly they accept anything to publish. And on the left-hand side, you can see that there are false journal metrics. So they refer to site factor, which they're trying to mislead. They also use GIF factor, where in fact they're trying to confuse authors to think that it's the journal impact factor. And then the Google Scholar, they mention as an index here, but as I also mentioned this earlier, so Google Scholar is a search engine of academic literature, but it's not regarded as an article or a journal index per se. And then you can also see some dubious emails being used. Yeah. And then here we find, this is an example of an editorial team where none of these members on the editorial board actually know that they've been added as editorial team members. So this is also fake. This is fake information that is provided here. So those were just a few examples. If you go to the Committee on Publication Ethics, they basically recommend two ways to address the problem. And that is the one is through education, scholarly research on the topic. So they're really recommending that, researchers working within the science and technology environment do a lot more research on predatory journals, that we raise as much awareness as possible, that we provide guides to prospective authors, especially as supervisors, libraries, etc. And the other thing is then to criminalize it. So this is fraud that takes place. So you can also use the court system to penalize the owners and the producers and exert then the force of law in terms of heavy fines. So where the victim here is the author, and through working with the university or with a funding body, for example, who paid the fee, can basically take legal action against these predatory journals. So I wanted to mention, although this is mentioned by COPE, by the Committee on Publication Ethics, I'm only aware of one litigation that has taken place. So it was a legal complaint that was made in the US in 2016, and it was the US Federal Trade Commission that won a court case against Omics Group. So this is a well-known predatory or notorious predatory company based on deceptive marketing claims about their journals and conferences. So that was the basis then for taking them to court, and the court eventually did impose a fine of approximately 50.1 million USD on the Omics Group. So this is an example where court action was taken, and it was won against this this predatory company. So what can we do about this? Coming almost to the end of my presentation here is that there are different ways that we can, firstly, to be aware of them, of all the red flags, look out for them. You can use checklists. There are quite a few avoid lists. The Beals list, unfortunately, is not being it's not being by Beal himself, and you can find historical information there. There's the Scopus discontinued list. So we've on an annual basis, we reevaluate all the journals that we have in Scopus to make sure that they're not predatory. We remove them, we publish them in a separate list to show that these journals have been discontinued. There's the Directory of Open Access Journals delisted. So a lot of lists, there's Trajalians, there's the Cabal International list, which is a subscription subscription database. And the literature tells us that there are more than 90 such lists. So a lot of lists that give us information about predatory journals. We can't use all of these lists. I mean, nobody can go through so many lists. So what we actually recommend is to rather use the trusted lists. Any journal list that you know has gone through, where the journals go through a selection process, like Scopus, for example. Every of the 24,000 journals in Scopus has gone through a selection process. The same for Web of Science, the directory for open access journals. These are but a few of the examples. I want to show you in the next slide here is why you can trust these curated lists like Scopus, for example. This slide shows you the rigorous process the journal needs to go through before it is selected to be indexed in Scopus. So they have to comply with all of these criteria, a detailed publication ethics statement, and a independent board of journal editors, the content selection and advisory board. They go through every single one of these journals to make sure that they have a convincing journal policy, that the quality is good, that the journal is of good standing, that they keep to their publication schedule, that they have a good quality website, that information is provided on this website. So this is what we recommend. Use the trusted lists like Scopus, Web of Science, and so on. It's almost easier than trying to find all the many avoid lists out there. Another very good, and I want to mention this, a very good resource to use also is the Think, Check, Submit. And this is a initiative and representative of many publishing houses where guidance is provided for authors and how to select a journal and focusing on finding the right journal for your specific research that you want to publish. And in that process, automatically you will be guided towards not selecting a predatory journal. So go to this website, Think, Check, Submit. It's really one of the ones that we recommend you use. So I'm going to answer up front because this is the question I always get. So oops, accidentally, I submitted to a predatory journal and what can be done about that. So if we go to COPE, to ask them about what is the withdrawal of accepted manuscript from a predatory journal, the advice that they provide on their website is to request a withdrawal if you have not paid the APC yet. So if you've not paid article processing charges, ask for a withdrawal immediately when you find out that it's a predatory journal. What has often also been successful is to just threaten with legal action, or you could contact the editor-in-chief of a legitimate journal and discuss the matter with that editor-in-chief. And often they would then accept your manuscript with a notice that this is the only valid version of the paper, right? So this is a discussion between you and the editor. So the only way that you can really get out of it is if you withdraw before you've paid the APC. Otherwise, you're going to plagiarize if you publish again. So that brings me to the end of this session. I've added the references here of some of the sources that I've used to put this together.
For I think we the session.
So let me see, there's a question. I'm looking at the shorter ones now. How can I know the information are false? Do I have to check in another maybe credible Then there's a longer question. Sometimes there could be several manuscripts from one project having some participant social demographic. How can another use the same social demographic? Okay, so this, I'm not going to try to answer this. This is not related to the topic at hand, and I think it might come up in the next session. How will a potential author know all these things about a predatory journal are false? Exactly, yeah, as I mentioned, if you become aware of any of the red flags, then you need to follow that up. If there are not red flags, it's not, I don't think you need to do all of these checks. So I see there's recently I wrote a post on Retraction Watch urging Elsevier to reconsider the process of indexing content in Scopus to ensure its reliability. When will I receive an official detailed response? Right, so Retraction Watch is independent from Elsevier, and already Elsevier through Scopus, we have increased our vigilance in terms of the journals that are indexed. So we have various mechanisms, algorithms running in the background, looking at any changes in the demographics of the journals to flag whether a journal has maybe become predatory and so on, and then they are re-evaluated on a continuous basis now. So there's already a very enhanced vigilance around that. If you're waiting for a response, that if you've written to Retraction Watch, they should respond to you on that. Let me see, is the Beals list really the benchmark for ascertaining predatory journals? There are cases of some Scopus index journals captured under Beals list. Right, so Beals list was basic. Beal had to close down his service. There are anonymous members that are trying to keep the lists up to date, as there is no one single authoritative list on predatory journals. And I don't think there ever will be, because these journals start and stop continuously. And so it's very difficult. There are, illegal practices, and they hide themselves very well. So there's no one single list to do that. So we have found some predatory journals in Scopus, especially in the beginning when they started, where journals started out as being legitimate and turned predatory over time or were hijacked. These have been removed, and we've published all the journals that have been removed from Scopus are published in the list of discontinued Scopus journals. So you will find that also on the Scopus website. I think I'll take one more question. What do you think about journals that ask for publishing charges and it costs the same as an open access journal? I'm not sure exactly if I understand this question, because it would usually be an open access journal that would ask for a publication charge, and that is fine, because that means that the article is then made available to all readers and not only to subscription journals. But sorry, I'm not sure I understand that question completely. Could you display the trusted lists again? I can do that, but I really do want to stress here that these are but a few examples. So I think I've only listed 3 journals here, but there are subject specific lists that I haven't mentioned here. So Scopus, Web of Science, they have very rigorous selection criteria for journals to be indexed in these sources. Also the directory for open access journals. recently also became a lot more vigilant and also had to remove some of the journals from these lists. So these are only 3 examples of the trusted lists. So I hope that helps. So do predatory journals have an authentic site score or ranked in official lists? No, this would be one of the flags that would indicate to you. So a predatory journal, if it was accidentally listed or it became predatory in Scopus or Web of Science or one of those indexes, it would be removed. So it would not have a site score or a journal impact factor, and it would be removed from any official lists. We have seen an increase actually in journals that appear to be legitimate, and then they very quickly after they've been selected to be indexed, then they become predatory, or then we can see the true colors. So we rely also a lot on feedback from authors, from librarians, anybody that notices anything suspect about a journal to alert us as quickly as possible so that we can remove them. Right, I think I'm going to there's a please, sorry, the last one, please share the link of Publication Ethical Committee. I don't think I've got that. Maybe, I'm not sure if we're sharing the slides, but if it is in the slides. So let me just check if it's here. But this is very easy to find if you just Google. Oh, here it is. So https publicationethics.org. So if you just use that
can you put it on the chat, Lucia? Maybe during the next session you could
yes, I can
spend
do
some
that.
time answering some questions by typing and putting some links in the chat for the participants to visit later.
I can do that.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Lucia, for taking time to answer the questions. And hereby I proceed to the next session, the publishing models and differences between these models. And let me welcome our next speaker, Khaled Chalen, Customer Consultant for Africa.
Thank you, Nadine. So it's already been a long event, I would say. So for the upcoming 30 to 35 minute stops, I'll be covering with you a little bit of an introduction on publishing models and open access. My name is Khaled Chalen. I'm a core research solutions consultant working for Africa in Elsevier. I just wanted to start this presentation here. So this is going to be our last session for today, and I just wanted to, it will come in as complementary or to complement the topic that was being raised by Lucia here today, to understand really how do publishers work, and a little bit from the business side from these journals as well. So that would help us understand how do journals work if they're working in a legitimate way, and will help us give us some insights on what are the motives for predatory publishing as well. But the grand goal for this presentation really would be to understand, as an author, what are my options if I'm going for legitimate journals, what kind of options are offered by journals when it comes to publishing there. So let's start first by understanding a little bit what publishers do really here. So it's been all a continuation of the dissemination of knowledge, starting with printing, and ever since the conception of the very first journal in 1665. So Henry Oldenburg is considered to be the first editor and the first commercial publisher for a scientific journal, working with the philosophical transactions of the Royal Society. And there are four main roles for what publishers do. What's the role of scientific publications when it comes to the grand scheme of pushing knowledge forwards? It's the registration. So there's always a part of having a timestamp to when an article was first published, and actually it establishes precedence in determination of who actually reached this scientific discovery first. And then comes a second part, which is the certification, because the process the journals work with, the peer review process, is built to ensure the validity and the integrity of the scientific content being shared in the scholarly communication. Then comes a part where once we have a certified content that has been peer reviewed and checked by specialists in the field, then comes the part of dissemination, how to spread that knowledge, and we're speaking now how to spread that knowledge worldwide to the entire academic community and beyond that as well. And the fourth part is the preservation, and how do we document and maintain an archive of all the body of knowledge, of all the achievements that has been done into science, and what's the current progress at each point, to have this preserved for centuries and hopefully for eternity here as we're speaking as well. So when it comes to the journal publishing cycle, it usually starts by managing submissions. Soliciting here is a very tricky term to be mentioned here. So usually when journals or conferences, to that matter, conference proceedings as well, they usually, sometimes they do have a call for papers, and this is usually a general call at times. Or they would have, the journals would have on their websites now for speaking, clear guidelines for what to do and how to submit that article themselves. However, if a journal is soliciting actually submissions directly from researchers for original research papers, as Lucia said a little bit earlier, this is usually a sign that this journal is not getting enough submissions, which is usually a red flag that you'd see. So for example, if you're opening your inbox and you're finding an email that's still addressed to you personally and telling you, please submit your paper in our journal, that's usually a red flag to worry a little bit about. Original research papers are not usually solicited in a personal or a direct approach. It's usually solicited at large by announcing that this journal is accepting submissions in the following fields, and it's usually being done through the journal's website itself, with a submission management system that will lead you on the way. The only exception for this could be for review articles. Review articles are usually commissioned by the editors. So in most cases, an editor would actually be in contact with a significant or a prominent researcher for a field, in a specific field, and they will ask them to prepare a review paper that summarizes the current state of the art in a specific field or in a specific topic. So these are cases where actually it's a commissioned submission in that case. It works the same as an invited presentation, for example, in a conference here. So once that authors have started to manage submissions, there is the other part of managing that peer review process, establishing a platform that can manage the peer review, how to contact and follow up with the peer reviewers. It's worth mentioning here that peer reviewers, they have to remain anonymous in any kind of peer review that you're doing here. Only the editor knows who really the peer reviewers are for a specific manuscript. They remain anonymous as reviewer by numbers, reviewer 1, reviewer 2, or more if there are multiple reviewers. So in the very least, there's a single blind system where the author does not know who the reviewers are. And there are some cases where it's double blind, where it's even the author is anonymized and the reviewers don't know who the author for the manuscript they are reviewing. Authors are usually, why would authors want to go through this cycle here, and why would they want to solicit and manage their submission? Why would authors want to submit and go through the entire peer review process and go through this hassle? It is part really of the mandate of academic researchers here that we're talking about. So academic researchers are supposed to generate and disseminate the knowledge that they are working through. And journal publications and publication cycles with different mediums like conferences, for example, or books, are just means for making that knowledge disseminated within the academic community, or what we call here scholarly communication. In order to make sure that the content that was prepared by a researcher was actually valid and certified, this is why they would have to go through the peer review process. As discussed in our sessions earlier today, so the peer reviewers, they usually give feedback of either it's rejected or accepted with minor or major modifications, or accepted, which is very rare to happen at the first time. So there is usually feedback coming back from the reviewers, going to the authors addressing those comments and going forward. So it's a back and forth what happens in peer review, with the editor and the management system for peer review being at the center of it. Once at the end of this point, once peer review has ended, we have an accepted manuscript. This is a manuscript which has been scrutinized, which has received feedback from the reviewers, and which is supposedly optimized at the best form for this type of communication and sharing that kind of knowledge. This is the same content that would later on appear in the final article, but there are many processes that would occur between peer review and between having the article published. So part of it is editing, preparation, typesetting, and so forth. But when it comes to publishing, there are other processes as well that are being mentioned here. So for example, if we're talking about printing, for example, so the printing process itself, or the typesetting for printing, if we are talking currently about publishing in terms of electronic publishing being the major form of publishing here, there are a lot of metadata enhancement and building the platform and increasing the discoverability of the research itself. So once here it's ready to be published and disseminated, it's disseminated whether in print format or in the electronic versions of the articles themselves. A lot of enhancements go beyond having just a PDF with the content. It's really about having those metadata, this discoverability, a platform that would make them visible and optimized and attracting and having those articles and those journals attracting readers and later on attracting citations as well. So there is the part where this is archived and preserved and actually promoted to be used as well. So for the first part, so that's a little bit of few pointers on peer review. We've gone through many of these today. There are online peer review systems. So for example, Elsevier has the Elsevier editorial system. This is used by the journal editors to communicate with the authors, with the peer reviewers, and so forth. And the websites for journals themselves should have a link within the submission portal, and I'm talking across all publishers, and they should have very clear guidelines on how to prepare and how to submit the journal itself for publication, and what's the business model really here that's being employed by the journal itself. So the part with editing and preparing, so there are multiple phases where the same article goes through, and that will be very important to revisit while we're talking about open access models here. So there is the preprint, and the preprint means that the manuscript as prepared by the author without going through peer review. So this is, in publishing terms, this is more really of the raw material here that's the input for the entire publishing process here. This is what the author have prepared, and this is what they have submitted for a journal to be considered for peer review. There are multiple revised versions with every with every round of the peer review, and every time you address the comments of peer reviewers, until you reach a distilled version of this preprint when it's finally been scrutinized and has gone thoroughly through the peer review process, which is what we call the accepted manuscript here. Once the accepted manuscript here, we have the distilled version of the content. This is the content in its final form that should be there, but there are multiple enhancements that come later on. So there is the document proof, where there are copy editing, author proofing, and preparation for publishing. And finally, there is the final published journal article. This is the final format of the article as it should appear with the logo, pagination, and branding. So at this point here, this is what we call at the document proof, this is what we call the article in press. Still, there are multiple enhancements being added to the article itself. And here, when we see here the published journal article, this is the final format the same format that would look like in print. And there is the publishing itself, whether it's print, HTML, and PDF copy, and having something that can preserve this article on the long term as well. So with the publishing itself, so there are multiple models for the traditional print journals, for example, and this used to be the case up till the late 20th century, being the main mode for disseminating knowledge itself. And then there was the shift for having electronic journals as well. Actually, Science Direct, Elsevier Science Direct had the lead on this, being the first publisher to have a platform for their own platform for electronic publishing as well. There are other modes for disseminations. So some portals are publishing articles, but they have advertising support, for example. So that can be that can happen for some of the publishers there, and there are also been more developments towards having mobile apps for publishing as well. So it's not just a website anymore. And when it comes to the traditional publishing models, and this will be the topic of our discussion today, there are two main models for publishing an article. There is the traditional publishing. So all the process that the publisher works through incurs a cost, whether a journal, whether a publisher is a commercial publisher, or a scientific society, for example, that's using the publishing business to actually support its own activities later on. There is always an incurred cost when it comes to publishing, whether you're talking it's print or whether it's being discussed as electronic publishing, and that cost usually has to come from somewhere. We have two main models within the publishing world. The traditional publishing model is where the author does not incur any cost for disseminating their own ideas, and the cost is incurred on the reader side usually in forms of subscriptions being made by university libraries to the journals themselves. So that's like reading a newspaper or like reading a book. You're the reader. It's either that you will buy the book yourself, or that you will be a part of a library that will buy the book and make it available for you. We're talking in printing terms here. However, with the electronic publishing, there is a new model that's been addressed here. It's called the Gold Open Access model. This is where the author would be covering the cost for publishing, where the publisher makes the article freely accessible to everyone everywhere. So the cost in this model, for the Gold Open Access model, is really incurred by the author, and we usually don't mean like the author covering the publishing cost out of their own pocket. It's usually part of their institutional funding or funding that they have received from a grant to work on that research project. And the promotion for research happens with conferences, with other solutions that integrate with the content, make it more discoverable and more accessible. Usually these are subject informed. So these are other platforms where the journal articles would be accessible as well, and would have its content more searchable and better enhanced for specialists in a specific field. Like GFS, it's working on geology or patient research or clinical pharmacology, for example. So they have their own designated solutions for these. And the preservation for archiving. So you have your own warehouse, you have your own website, which keeps the articles for long time periods. However, there are other initiatives that intend to having records maintained for eternity, if I might say. So there are programs like Clocks or Portico or the National Library of Netherlands. So we partner up with them, for example, Elsevier as a publisher, to have the content preserved there as a second copy or a multiple archive for it as well. So how does publishing work again when it comes to me as an author? How do I perceive the different publishing models being implemented here? So as I said, so the traditional publishing is how publishing used to work ever since the 17th century until now. It's where the author published free of charge, and the output or the journal issues themselves would be accessible only for institutions or individuals with a subscription to those journals. On the other hand, there is the Gold Open Access publishing. This is where the author would cover the cost for the publishing itself, and the article would be made freely available to all online readers. And some journals publish only in the gold open access format. Some journals offer the subscription model. Some journals offer both models to have some of the content of each issue as open access and some of the content as subscription model in what we call hybrid journals. However, by the end of the day, it's either for my article, it's either the readers are paying to read my article that I will publish myself, or I will be covering the cost myself to make it available and accessible to readers for free later on. So these are the two main models here. And to understand more what is open access and why do we have those two models here, so we need to understand a little bit more about the term open access itself. It's a term that was coined in 2001 in Budapest Open Access Initiative, and the idea was to make the information being generated by researchers freely accessible to public. So that the idea that knowledge can be anyone with the need for the knowledge being contained within the content that's being published becomes accessible to them. So it's all about about having so the ideal here, or the final goal for the open access, is to make information more available freely to readers worldwide. And the gold open access here is one format of reaching that ideal. So this is where an article becomes freely accessible to public once it's been published, starting from being an article in press even. This is where the article becomes freely accessible through the full power of the publisher platforms, and it's freely available for everyone everywhere because the cost for the publishing process has already been covered by the author side, which is the author using their institutional fund or using their grant money as well. However, there is another model that was built to make the subscription model more in line with the open access idea. So the green open access model that you see here is actually a subscription model, but it means that under specific terms, the content of the paper that was published could be made freely accessible to readers worldwide by the author themselves. So what happens is, after the green open access idea here is basically this. When a journal has been, when a journal article has been peer reviewed and has been started to be published online, subscribers to this journal will have immediate access to the article being published by this journal. However, after a certain period of time has passed, which is called an embargo period, the authors are free to self-archive the accepted manuscript. And if you can remember before that, we said the many formats for the article before as it goes through publishing. So the accepted manuscript is the article as it was distilled through the peer review process. This is the same content in the article that was later on published in the final published PDF or article or HTML format article at the end of the day. So it's the same content exactly without the embellishments or the typesetting and the metadata enhancement. That the author would be free to self-archive and to put the same article that is in the journal, and they have to add a specific clause or a reference to the journal, to the article in the final published format as well. So the idea here is that to help authors achieve an open access to their content, to the research that they have worked on, and if they do not prefer to go through paying an APC or incurring a cost for the gold open access. So this is an idea or a policy that was established to help reach the ideal of open access without incurring the cost of the APC here. So when it comes to publishing again, so Elsevier publishes under the subscription model, which we have discussed a bit earlier, and the gold open access model, where the article publishing charges are being covered by the authors through their institutional or funding grants. There is a third model of journal of publishing here that's still new. it has lesser outreach than the subscription and the gold open access articles. Is called the diamond or the subsidized open access model. This is where an entity that owns the journal subsidizes publications in the journal. So here in the diamond open access model, the article would have the same performance and the same perception as a gold open access money, as the gold open access article. However, the cost itself or the money itself came not from the author or their institutions. It came from an institution that subsidizes publishing within the same journal. This could be the institution that owns the journal, or could be a third-party institution that just subsidizes and would pay the APC in lieu of the authors for a specific journal. So what happens, for example, is that, for example, one of the cases for Diamond Open Access is when a coalition that has been working in theoretical physics, including CERN, for example, in Switzerland, and multiple physics laboratories worldwide, where they decided that they would be covering the APCs for all publications being submitted to a set of journals in theoretical physics, for example. So that's a case where a third party was actually subsidizing the gold open access. So the diamond open access here is a subset of the gold open access. And there is an entity that subsidizes publishing in this. Another case, for example, is that an institution could own a journal and they are publishing that journal in partnership with Elsevier, for example, or any other that are publishing journals in partnership with Elsevier, and the cost for the publishing is being covered by the institutions which actually own these journals, and they're publishing in partnership with Elsevier. So the author end up not paying an APC or paying something that's very, very small in amount to have their articles, but the actual APC is being covered by a third-party institutions. Terms like green open access or open archive, which means that the content can be later on be made available. These are based on the subscription model here. The green open access, as we discussed a bit earlier, the green open access model is where after an embargo period for green open access, the author can actually share the accepted manuscript and self-archive it, make it available online with reference to the final published article at the publisher website. So this goes after a green open access embargo period. There is another policy that's adopted by some of the journals, and you can find it in some of Elsevier's journals, called the open archive or the delayed open access policy. So this is where the publisher itself would make that article after a specific period of time become as if it were good open access, meaning that the article on Science Direct in the case of Elsevier or on another publisher's website would become freely accessible to everyone for good. Okay? So this is called the delayed open access model. So for example, a case with some of Elsevier's most elite journals with Cell Press, for example. So Cell is one of the most prestigious journals that's being published by Elsevier. It's the top journal when it comes to biological fields, for example. So Cell publishes subscription model articles. They can make exceptions for accepting gold open access as an exception because the research was funded by a specific funding body with agreement with Cell. So that would be an exception to accept gold open access articles. However, what Cell Press does with Cell Journal, for example, is that after 6 months, the author is free to use the green open access policy. So their accepted manuscript becomes available online. And after 12 months, the Elsevier itself will make the article become open access on its own platform in what we call the open archive policy. So the article is accessible on Science Direct for free after it's been published by 12 months. After 6 months, the author are free to share the accepted manuscript wherever they want with some restrictions or specific policy terms, but they are free to share the accepted manuscript online. So there is a common misperception perception here is that the majority of the articles that are being published would require the authors to pay an EPC. However, about 70% of the articles being published worldwide till this day are still published under the subscription model, where the authors are not paying for an EPC. However, gold open access is growing fast, and there is more calls to have journals become completely gold open access, especially coming from Europe, for example. So it's already picking up pace. However, still till this day, the majority of articles are still published under the subscription model. So that's more of another comparison between gold open access and green open access, covering the same topics that were mentioned. Here, the public have access to the final published article, immediate and permanent access, because an open access fee, an EPC, was paid by the author or on their behalf. And its use for commercial uses, for example, is determined by a license, and we'll get to that in the next slide. And how do I publish a gold open access journal? It's simple. Go to a journal that publishes exclusively gold open access, or a journal that employs as a hybrid model. It's a subscription journals that would accept open access articles being published as well. The green open access is built on the subscription model. The free public access to a version of your article, which is the accepted manuscript, and there is a time delay, what's called an embargo period. There is no fee payable by the author. The cost has already been covered by the subscriptions, and the authors retain the right to use their articles for a wide range of purposes, and it should have a user license attached to it, as mentioned earlier. So if you want to publish green open access, there are multiple self-archiving platforms or another platforms that you could actually use to publish the accepted manuscript itself. And one thing to understand here is that gold open access articles are peer-reviewed. Okay, so paying for having your article published should not mean that you are not receiving the same scrutiny under any other publishing model. It does not mean that the journal is unethical or a predatory journals, for example. And there is immediate access to the article on the platform as well. And there are user licenses that you would need to use. If you are using the same final article version to publish it or post it anywhere, it needs to have a cross mark on it, which is already being provided by the publisher, just to make sure that if there are any later on modifications that happen to the article, for example, it was linked to a corrigendum or to an erratum, like correction forms, for example, or if the article has been retracted, there is always a link integrated within the PDF itself, so that people can see if there are any updates has been done to the article itself on the publisher platform as well. So the APC is something usually between $150 and $6,000, which covers the publication costs. It's payable after the paper is accepted for publication in a journal. This is where actually the author has committed completely the article to that journal being discussed here. And the APC usually depends on the journal quality, on the editorial and technical process. There are some competitive considerations, marketing conditions as well. And there might be other revenue streams associated with the journals that could actually drive the APC a little bit down. There are waivers that can be set by case-on-case basis. So for example, you could always communicate with an editor for a workshop for a specific journal and ask them for a waiver. Sometimes editors could be able, this is not very this is not in the majority of cases, but there are many exceptions where we have seen editors applying full waivers at times, or partial waivers when it comes to the submissions being that they actually have received. And there is a program, and this usually comes with countries that are covered by Research for Life programs, and it might be granted as well. There are sometimes agreements with funding bodies. So for example, a specific journal could have an agreement with a specific funder, so they receive different rate or different policy when it comes to the APC being applied here. So the Research for Life program covers the low and middle income countries worldwide, applying different rates for discounts for subscriptions as well as publishing. So as you can see here, so the countries in orange, these are the Group B countries. They would expect from Elsevier to have 25% discount on APCs. The countries in blue would expect 50% discount on the APC, and this applies automatically for any submission being published or submitted from those articles themselves. If you come from a country that's in white, then you'll have to pay the full APC. So as I said, so there are fully gold open access journals. These publish exclusively in gold open access model. They will not accept subscription-based articles. So in other words, you would actually have to pay the APC or to have a waiver, partial or full waiver, to publish within the journal itself. There are many journals that were subscription journals or hybrid journals, but they transitioned into becoming fully gold open access journals. There are mirror journals that we have done with Elsevier. So a mirror journal is having one journal that's subscription model, and we have created another version of that journal that works with the same policy, with the same standards, with the same aims and scope and everything, but it works in gold open access model. So there are like two sister journals, one is subscription and one is gold open access in that case. Hybrid journals are subscription journals that would give the authors the choice to publish gold open access within these in what we call the hybrid uptake. So if I'm submitting an article to a hybrid journal, I would see both options in front of me. Do I want to publish do I want to publish under the subscription model, or do I want to publish at the gold open access model for the same journal here? There are journals that are subscription based, and they would only make exceptions based on funding body arrangements, like Cell, for example, that I used earlier. Subsidized journals are the Diamond Open Access journals, where the APC is covered by an institution that owns the journal or a third-party institution. And there is the Open Archive or Delayed Open Access. This is a policy being implemented by the journal that is subscription journal that will make the subscription-based articles become open access on the publisher platforms after a period of time. So if you are publishing gold open access, there are two common licenses that are common to use with gold open access, and there's currently been an update with a third customized license that Elsevier also provides. But in general, the two main or very famous gold open access policies or licenses here. One of them is the commercial license, Creative Commons BY 4.0. BY, it means that there should always be an attribution to the authors themselves to reshare the content there, and it can be shared for commercial purposes. This is only granted for academic researchers. If you so you can actually request, the default is to have the non-commercial license, but if you are an academic, you can actually request to have the commercial license as well. So the non-commercial license, CC BY and CND, meaning that it cannot be used for commercial purposes, or it cannot have any other derivatives being used for commercial purposes. What this means is that you can actually, it's free to read, print, and download for both cases. It's free to republish or post that PDF anywhere else or display it in a repository. In a commercial license, it can be attached to text and data mining. However, in the non-commercial purposes, text and data mining is only allowed for private use and not for redistribution. The article could be translated. The article could be reused in portions or extracts in another work, for example. So if you're publishing in a book later on, for example. And commercial license, meaning that this article could be resold by the author themselves or whoever retains the user license, or any commercial purposes in that sense here. But then again, remember that the article is already freely accessible at the publisher website itself. So just to summarize here at the end, so So to summarize here, so there are many phases that the article will go through. Pre-submission is called the preprint. This is the raw form of the article before peer review. Preprints remain the full ownership of the author themselves. They can be shared anywhere at any time, unless the journal has a different preprint policy. But the general case is that preprints can be shared anytime, anywhere, and put on, for example, a preprint server like Elsevier's SSRN or Archive or any other preprint server. If the journal is using double-blind peer review, meaning that they don't want the reviewers to know who the author is, they will ask you not to publish your preprint until the peer review, for example, has been complete. So usually preprints can be shared. This type of format for the article can be shared anywhere. After acceptance, the author manuscripts can be shared. So this is once the article has been accepted. If it is a subscription model, then you can still share it privately with students or colleagues, privately on an institutional repository that's not available for public, on a personal website or blog in the accepted manuscript format, or to refresh preprints on Archive and JPEG, for example, and privately on some partner sites by Elsevier as well. If you are Gold Open Access, then once it's been accepted and published, you can share it freely anytime, anywhere. And you can choose a CC BY license, for example, so you can put it on another commercial platform, for example, as well. If it's a subscription article, it can only be shared as a link, or it can be shared in the final published article format privately with students or colleagues, or on a group where you're collaborating with, for example, on Mendeley, you're having the same library being shared with other collaborators as well, and privately on some commercial partner sites. One thing here that's very worthy to add is that Elsevier, if you have published your article with Elsevier, Elsevier journals would give you a special link that would work for 55 days after you have published your article. So anybody using that link will have access to the full text PDF. And here I'm talking about subscription articles. So your article could require subscription worldwide, but then again, you would have a link that you can give anyone, anywhere. You can use it to promote your article and help others to get full access to the full text PDF within 55 days of publishing itself. If you have published as a subscription model article and you have waited for the embargo period, this is where the accepted manuscript can be shared publicly on non-commercial platforms and publicly on commercial platforms that are partnered with Elsevier. In all cases, all forms of sharing for the article, whether it's printed or accepted manuscript, should not be re-enhanced to imitate the final published journal article. And it should have a digital object identifier to help people verify the article on the publisher website. And especially this helps if there are any later on modifiers that happen to the article, like I said, errata, corrigenda, or God forbid, retractions. So that should cover the point here about open access. You can always check this on any journal. If you go to any journal website, there is always a guide for authors. So this is an example from a journal on Science Direct, but you could find the same with any other journal. The guide for authors will instruct you on how to prepare your manuscript, as well as will instruct you on what are the model being implemented by the journal, what are the policies when it comes, for example, for green open access or open archive, as well as any information you would know about the open access options for this journal. So that's the guide for authors here. So you can find here information about what happens to the, for example, what happens on the peer review if it's single or blind, what happens in the publishing itself, what happens after acceptance, and it will have a portal for the author inquiries as well. The last thing here is that there is a platform that we have built for all Elsevier journals to help you find a good fit if you want to publish with an Elsevier journal. So there is journalfinder.com. You would need only to put in the paper title, the paper abstract, the keywords, and the field of research. It would use artificial intelligence to help suggest which Elsevier journal would work best. And it will give you more insights about the journal itself, whether that journal offers gold open access or not, if that journal offers a subscription option or not. And you can see, you can actually filter the results by their metrics, whether it's the site score from Scopus or the impact factor from the journal impact factor report, from the journal citations report, sorry. And it will also give you insights on the review time and the publication time to first decision. First decision is whether the manuscript would go into peer review or would be disk rejected, and the average time to have that article published finally. So that's an example here for a search, and you can see here it's giving you results, and it's trying to tell you how much of certainty within if this is a good match or not. And it would tell you if you expand it here, you can find more details about the journal itself. So it's important when you are choosing a journal to summarize what we've been discussing in multiple sessions today. It's important to make the right choice with the journal to increase your readership, to increase the citations you're receiving, to diminish publication time lag, and to influence performance evaluations and metrics for yourself and your institution. Bad choices result in cost being put on wrong footing here. Reputational cost if you have fell as a victim for other researchers or a predatory published journal, and it would result also in research funding being wasted. Your good ideas could lack the visibility, so you could have a diamond in the rough by the end of the day as well. And sometimes we've seen the cases where some journals, whether they're sloppy or they're predatory, but they just vanished, and that article that you have published is no longer archived or accessible anywhere no more. So that brings us here to the end of our discussion today. You can find always more materials, more trainings on researcheracademy.com. There are many trainings on preparation for research or funding or preparing your manuscript. What goes on the publication process or the peer review itself, or how to communicate your research and how to promote your research after it has been published. There are many career path advice as well. And you can always follow us on our Elsevier Africa Facebook page, where this is being live streamed currently. And our YouTube channel has a big library of recordings of the webinars that we've been doing. So Elsevier Africa on YouTube as well. And please accept my invitation to join us in the Elsevier community Facebook group. We try and we strive to have this really as a place for promoting discussions, for raising topics, raising debates at times. So it's always have to have this free space for discussion between all of us here. So that brings me to the end of my presentation here. And this is my email you can see on screen. If you have any webinar related inquiry as well, please contact us at webinarqueries@elsevier.com. And with that, I relinquish back to Nadine. If we have any questions that are pressing, kindly let me know as well.
Thank you very much, Khalid, for your presentation. Thank you for all the information presented. I think it was very informative. I hope it was as informative for the participants as it was for the rest of us. So yeah, I think we covered all the questions in the Q&A box. So without further ado, I think we took a lot, we spent like more than 3 hours. I think everyone is kind of tired now. So I'd like to give back the mic to Juliet from Academic Hive. And just before I do that, I just want to assure you all that you will receive an email tomorrow, an automatic email from Zoom on your inbox, on your email that you used for the registration, where you will have the link of the workshop on Researcher Academy and the code to be able to pull your certificate from there. And just before downloading your certificate, you'll be asked for a survey. So please kindly answer the survey, and thank you in advance for doing that for our improvement of our next sessions and webinars. So with that, I hand it over to Juliet.
Okay, thank you, Nadine. Thank you, all the participants for presenting. The workshop was really, really helpful and insightful as well. So just like Nadine has said, please register on the Researcher Academy. Yeah, Elsevier provides an academic website to unlock research potential for researchers. So that's the Researcher Academy. You can get lots of trainings, modules covering the whole research cycle there. So that's something you would want to take advantage of by Elsevier. So thank you, Nadine. Thank you, everyone. We have officially come to the close of the Academic Hive Research Bootcamp. It's been a 10-day intensive training, and today was not different from every other day as well. It's been very insightful. It's been very interesting. Please make use of the survey so that we can improve on such sessions in future. Yeah. I would also want to say something about Academic Hive. Academic Hive is not an indexing um, organization. I would just like to correct that. It's not an indexing organization. We do not index journals or manuscripts or whatever. I think that's Elsevier's aspect. Nadima, I hope I'm right.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's true. So we do not index journals at Academic Hive, but what we do at Academic Hive is that we want to promote, we want to reveal or expose the potential of African scholarship. So starting from next month, 1st of November, we will be hosting, we have a platform where we can host local journals. We are not indexing your journal, we rather host your local journals just to make it visible, just so that people can look at it and just maybe cite you. So that could be a first step to getting more recognition so that people can reach out to your journal, submit manuscripts, and then you can use the opportunity to apply to be indexed by Elsevier. Yeah, so thank you once more. If you have any further questions for Academic Hive, you can visit us at www.academichive.com and send us your question at info@academichive.com. We're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, we're on LinkedIn, and we are open to working with you at all times. So thank you so much. And then for Elsevier, you're gonna get a certificate for this workshop. Nadine has explained. You'll receive an email on how to get the certificate for this workshop. But for the bootcamp participants, you also have a different certificate that should be given to you, like maybe next week, sometime next week. Yeah, you will receive the certificate for participating in the 10-day bootcamp. So this has been really interesting, it has been engaging, and we look forward to having you all join us some other time in future. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you for participation. Thank you for your time, and see you in our next future webinars.